music is on, the disco ball has dropped, and it is time to get this party started. You are listening to episode 40 of DiscoTrek, a Star Trek Discovery after-party podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. Tonight, I am your host, Jeff Hulit, and unfortunately, Heather Barker had an emergency and was not able to join the podcast, so I am flying solo this evening. So I'm going to run through all of our housekeeping and stuff for all of you out there right now. So for those of you who are not familiar with the podcast, we are a community-based Star Trek discotheque of sorts, focusing on each episode of Star Trek Discovery as they air, along with some stuff that we do between seasons, like character deep dives and panel discussions, things like that. Tonight, we are discussing Through the Valley of Shadows. With us to talk about the episode are two members of the Star Trek fan community. One has been on the show previously, and one is new. So I will go ahead and introduce Mareike Spychala first. This is your first time being on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. You want to tell the folks out there a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your Star Trek fandom?
Well, I'm from Germany, but I'm currently in the States for research related to, I work at an American Studies department, and I remember being like 4 years old maybe and wanting to watch reruns of the original series, and my mom kind of shutting that down because she said it's not for children, and she may have been right. And then when I was around 12, I got my own TV set in my room, and at that point in time, one of the German TV channels had like TNG, DS9, and Voyager on back to back in the afternoons, so that's how I dove back in. And then Discovery I drifted away a little over the last couple of years, and then Discovery reignited my fandom. And
Wow.
I'm also currently co-editing a book on Discovery with a colleague from Munich. Her name is Sabina Mittermeier. You had her on for the Queer Trek episode about Calmets for that roundtable.
Very cool.
So yeah, the last year has been a lot of Star Trek, which makes me very happy.
Yes, that makes us all happy, and I'm really glad to hear that Discovery reignited your love for Trek. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's I'm rewatching all the old series from start to finish because I never saw all of them when they were on TV. So now I'm kind of using Netflix to watch all of them in the order they're supposed to be watched, and it's interesting how many things I pick up on now as an adult that as a kid just kind of went right over my head. So
for sure. Same with me watching TOS back in the 70s and early 80s, You know what a great time to be a new or returning Trek fan, that we have all these streaming services and we can just watch all of it at will. That's really awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and next up is a returning guest, Mr. Chris Bunye. How are you, Chris?
I'm fine, Jeff. Thanks for asking. And thanks for having me back.
Oh, our pleasure. Our pleasure. You know what? For listeners who did not listen to the previous episode that you were on, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your Trek fandom?
Yes. I started with Star Trek at the very first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It was just on. I was curious, and the rest is history. I've been a fan ever since, following all the Next Gen Era movies, the Kelvin timeline, so on. And then even with no active shows at the time, I still kept at it. And now with Discovery, it's just a new show, and I'm very excited to be part of it.
Yeah, I love this. Is such a common thread amongst so many of the guests that we have on this show, that how engrossing Trek can become. When you first jump in and you're in the shallow end of the pool and you just start to go in deeper and deeper and deeper, and next thing you know, you're a Trekkie. So I think we all kind of have that in common, and I think that speaks a lot about what Trek is about and what it means to all of us. So awesome to hear that. And so we're going to hop into our discussion of this episode in just a minute, but let's do a couple of quick housekeeping things first. So as I mentioned before, DiscoTrek is community focused and evolved from our desire to give the fans in our community a way to talk about Star Trek Discovery. So to enter for your chance to join us on DiscoTrek, it's now open to the public. We're not just restricted to the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook anymore. So you can either, if you're a member of that group, you can watch for our posts each week, or you can follow us at disco_trek on Twitter and look for our posts there. And there'll be a link for you to follow to a form on our website that you can fill out to enter in for the next week's episode. So entering in will get you a random chance against all the other people who enter into the contest as well. There are only a couple of rules for this, so you can appear multiple times on a season, but you just can't appear on 2 episodes in a row. So if you were just on an episode, you will not be able to be on the next episode after that. You'll have to wait for an additional week to get on. But so we do our drawings on Friday evenings around 7 p.m. If you win or you don't win, you will get an email from us telling you the details for that recording, which will occur on a Sunday evening most of the time. At 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please, if you do win, respond to us within 24 hours of receiving the email so that we know and you're confirmed that you will be on the show. If you are not able to attend, we're going to need to roll the dice again and pick another guest. So if you don't get selected, hold on to your tickets. You will still be able to get into the show if someone can't make it. And if you do not win and you want to be entered into the following week, just respond to our email to us and let us know that you want to be included in next week's drawing. You don't have to submit a whole another form all over again. So let's see what else. Oh, Patreon. So, we do have a Patreon page. You can find it at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions, or by visiting our website and clicking on the Patreon link in the upper right hand corner. If you enjoy what we do here on DiscoTrek or any of our other Tricorder Transmission shows, of which there are many now, and we have a new one coming in the next couple of weeks, so keep an eye out for Faraday. It's going to be our tabletop Trek gaming podcast. So that's going to be pretty awesome. I know the first episode's in the can and being edited as we speak. So becoming a patron will give you instant access to our unedited episodes right after we record them, often with bonus material before and after, as well as early release episodes of some of our shows that don't do unedited versions. And, we have a lot of tiers that you can join at with different benefits. So take a look over at our Patreon page to see what all those benefits are for the different tiers. And check them out. And there's a lot of really cool stuff on there. We got video content coming out. We've got some great benefits for fans to be able to have input into our topics that we discuss on shows, and even some guaranteed guest spots for certain patrons at certain levels. So a lot of great stuff out there. We have no news on the Patreon front this week, no new patrons, but thank you all for supporting us. We really, really appreciate all of your contributions to our network, and we love you all, and hope to see you all in the next Patreon hangout that we should be doing very, very soon. So keep an eye out for the announcement on that. So, guys, are we ready to enter into our first segment and drop the record?
Yes, please.
All right. So, in this segment,
the needle.
I am dropping it. We are dropping the record right now. So, drop the record. We are doing our opening remarks and our overall reactions to the episode in general. So, Mareike, why don't you go first?
I'll preface this by saying that I think this was not my favorite episode this season, but partly because Perpetual Infinity hit me really hard in a lot of, in good ways, but also in very emotional ways. So I think that one for now is still my favorite, but I thought it was a really, really well done episode. There's a few criticisms I have, or things I wish they had done differently, but I definitely went from, at the beginning of the season, thinking, oh, well, we'll see what they're going to do with Pike, and not being quite sure what I thought about him being included, to absolutely loving how they've dealt with the character, how they've fleshed him out. I think Anson Mount's performances have been fantastic, and I thought that this last episode was so well done in terms of playing with this idea of fate and what do you do if you know what's waiting for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly like that he had a choice, so that it wasn't
Yep.
a predetermined thing, but that he could choose to take the crystal or not. And then if he hadn't, he would have had a chance to maybe evade what we know will happen to him. So I thought that was all very well done. And in terms of, I think it did a very good job of setting the scene for the last two episodes and building the tension for those and building, like, picking up all of those plot arcs that we need to resolve in 13 and 14.
Yep. Oh, God, I totally agree with you about the Pike angle on the show, and I have so many things that I want to talk about surrounding this, but I'm going to hold those off for a later segment and let Chris talk about his overall reactions to this episode.
As for me, I agree with Mareike, stating that this episode may not have been my favorite, but it was very well done. It's not necessarily because it was bad. It wasn't. It's because this episode, at least for me, it's all about moments throughout. It's about selective moments throughout it, which enrich the entire experience of Discovery. Obviously, Pike meeting Laurel and Vox's son, even the mess hall scene. Moments like that enrich the entire show. And
Agreed.
While this episode, if you look at it as a whole, is pretty okay, pretty good, it's the moments that sell it for me. That's why I wanted to go and discuss this episode tonight, because the fact that those moments really sold me on not only the season but characters. Not that I haven't saw them before, but they've solidified positions in certain cases in my my personal ranking. So you give them a bit more respect. You see them a bit more. There's stuff like that. But I like this episode not as a whole overall, even though it was very good. I liked it because of the moments it presented.
Great points. And that's something that I've been arguing about for a long time here on DiscoTrek, is that I always felt like I didn't get enough of a chance to get to know a lot of the characters on the ship and have a sense of who they were and where they fell in in their duties and their order and their and I think that the moments that you bring up really do help to give those characters a little more depth. I'm hoping that they continue to do this in Discovery. And like in season 1, you barely got to know anybody. Like the bridge crew seemed almost ancillary. Like they really were just there. And now we're starting to get little moments like the mess hall scene where we get to know them as people a little bit and get to, know who they are and connect with them on a different level than we have previously. So I agree with you so much, Chris, about the moments in this episode. And I didn't frame my head that way when I was writing my own notes for this, but that really puts a different spin on this episode for me. Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you guys. I was kind of middle of the road on this one. There were some really great standout performances, of course, as there always are in every episode of Discovery. As Mareike said, Anson Mount totally knocks it out of the park in this episode. And I've been wondering for a while where they were going to go with the Captain Pike angle and whether or not they were going to change his fate. And we can talk about that a little bit more in the later parts of the show. There's obviously a lot to dig into there, but interesting to see that he sees his fate in the future and knows what he's in for, and the delivery of those scenes with him reconciling that in his own head and talking himself up before he accepts the time crystal was really emotional, and I loved his performance in that. Really great Saru moments, a couple of really great Saru moments that stood out for me that we'll probably get into again later on. His confidence in Burnham and the character that he's growing into. I've been fascinated by Saru since he went through the change, and to see his confidence growing and hopefully growing towards Captain Saru at some point. That would be fantastic. I love what they did with that. Some amazing set building in this episode. That the hangar deck was mind blowing. I'm constantly blown away by the sets in Discovery. And, another great score. The score for this episode was captivating. The high tension scenes, the score just really drew you in and really enhanced the show for me. But, I've got a reputation over the last few weeks of being what we've called Mr. Negative. And I do have some really big nitpicks with this episode. And I think, the things that we talked about in our overall reactions lead me to believe that we're going to touch on some of those things in a little bit. So are we ready to move into our next segment, Play a New Track? Does anybody have anything else to say overall about this episode, Mareike?
I think one thing, so one of my nitpicks, and I think I'll just say that here and then maybe expand in one of the later segments,
okay,
is that I feel like one thing that annoyed me a little bit about this episode is that, so while I loved the moments between Stamets and Reno and Culver and Reno that we got, I also feel like they've been drawing out the resolution of that subplot for too long. Like I understand that they wanted some time to resolve that, and I think that's amazing that they took time to look at what's the after effects of dying and then being trapped in the network and then coming back. But I think they've given us too little spread out over too many episodes. So I wish, I kept waiting for Stamets and Culver to finally have a moment and talk, and it didn't happen again. So that was one of my that took some fun out of the episode for me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I can't help but agree with that. I've been, I was so happy when they brought Culver back and I realized that, they wanted to continue that arc. But yeah, I agree. It's a little snippets across so many episodes and you're like, oh my God, another one. Can we just resolve this already? I mean, obviously we're getting closer to a resolution, hopefully by the end of the season. But yeah, no, I definitely feel that. Chris, do you have any other overall thoughts for this episode before we move on?
No, in fact, I agree with both of you that the Culver and Stamets plotline has been spread too thin over too many episodes. They need to resolve it. I understand why they probably wrote it in the sense that they could include Reno into the mix and state, hey, Culver, he's going away, but even that's like you've got to talk. You got to talk to him. So you've got to talk to him, do this, and just don't wait. So yeah, I hope I know the solution's coming, but even that, I agree with both of you. It should have come already, or it should have been a bit more. It should have been earlier in the season, or even last episode. But I understand why, and if they wanted to include Reno, that was probably the case. But even that, I agree that the pacing on this has been very, very sparse over the last few episodes. Like, all right, so it's hanging over our heads. Is it going to happen? Are they going to get back to that type of thing? It has to happen soon.
Yeah.
So I agree. I agree about it. That's the only thing plot wise that seems to be, it's kind of there. We know the shoe's gonna drop somehow. That a conclusion is coming, but get to it. Snap to it already.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that's a side effect of the, this serial nature of the show that they try to draw things out a lot. I've drawn the allegory between this and Walking Dead several times where, it seems like a storyline should have a relatively quick outcome, but they seem to want to kind of keep spacing it out and spacing it out and spacing it out. And, some people may enjoy that and other people like me, and I guess the two of you, kind of get worn out with that, waiting for the resolution, the constant teasing of a resolution and not delivering on it. So, I just my big hope is that we're not gonna get to the season 1 type of finale where everything is wrapped up super fast in the last episode. I feel like we haven't really gotten many resolutions to anything so far in season 2, and we've only got a couple episodes left. So it looks like we're on the path to another really quick wrap up.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case.
Yeah. Well, let's hope the next episode brings at least some resolutions before the final one. So let's move on into the next section of the show, Play a New Track. And this is where we talk about what we learned about the Star Trek universe from this episode. So, Chris, what did you learn about the Star Trek universe?
Well, we know that Section 31 has at least 30 ships. If we
Yep.
count the ship that Michael and Spock went to, that's 31 ships. Seems appropriate.
Yeah, pretty
True.
much. It's a good number.
It's a good number. Well, they're really buying into the 31. I get it. I really do get it. It's just when you see all those ships like 31, it's like, really? But then again, if you think about it, yeah, all right, fine.
Yeah.
But also, if you think about it, all those ships, think about all those previous, or dare I say, future appearances of Section 31 throughout Star Trek history. That's how they get there very, very quickly. It's not just one ship, it's several. So it's I mean, for all we know, in the future on Deep Space Nine, there's a more advanced version of one of those ships that Sloan is on. Or in Enterprise, the director, we had one, they probably used to have a smaller fleet, like 5 or 6, but they probably had something like that. So they probably had a secret fleet all this time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah.
And it would make sense for them to enlarge that fleet after the Klingon War. So it might be that the 31, that's a newer number, because they step up Section 31 after the war. And with the whole control program and stuff. So that would make sense to see them expanding that part of the fleet.
I'm right there with you. I didn't even make that connection, but yeah, it makes sense that they would, and they've made reference to their activities post Klingon War. So yeah, that totally makes sense.
It makes sense because of the fact that there's still nation building, even without the war happening. 31 would have expanded their fleet nevertheless in order to enhance their coverage of Federation space, monitor threats along the border, stuff like that, or even infiltrate other organizations like the Orion Syndicate, or stuff like, or forces like that aren't necessarily governed by an actual government. So if that's the case, then they need to get in and out quick, and they need ships. We've just seen that now.
Yeah, true.
You know, funny thought just occurred to me. I am amazed that Section 31, knowing what we're talking about now, did not try to co-opt the Spore Drive for their own use. You would think that would be really useful for them to be able to pretty much instantaneously get anywhere they want, anytime they want. I'm surprised they didn't show up in Season 1 and try to take the Spore Drive, or at least copy it and get it onto their own ships.
But then I guess they still have the problem of not being able to, like, they need a navigator. So they'd either have to capture a lot of tardigrades or genetically manipulate a lot of humans.
True. I don't think they'd have a problem with either one of those things.
There is one other possibility. They probably have it as a black bag project somewhere off-site that we don't know about. So it's completely possible that they do have their own Spore Drive. They just haven't shown it. Yeah. We know 31 is a covert organization, and they develop a lot of weird projects that are off the books. If that's the case, then they probably have a Spore Drive in the wings just in case.
Yeah, good point. Mareike, what were you saying?
I was going to say, since they're still officially Starfleet at the point in time where we're right now, and not kind of as like they're off the books, but not as off the books as they are in DS9. So I was thinking that all of those Starfleet regulations pertaining to DNA experiments and eugenics stuff would still apply to them. So that's why I was thinking, how would they use it? How would they solve the navigator problem? But then again, they might just have it somewhere in a hangar in case they need it, and just, I don't know, have someone volunteer to get that tardigrade DNA, or just use tardigrades, because they might just do that.
True. Well, if they had it in a bay somewhere or something, I'm surprised that Control didn't immediately use it when it seized control of the ships. So interesting. We'll have to see what happens, of course, in the future. There's always a lot of mysteries around Discovery. Chris, do you have anything else that you learned?
We do know that one of Michael's old crewmates from the Shenzhou was recruited into 31. Also, we know that time flows differently on Boroff.
True.
Also, we know that Boroff is a monastery. We just didn't know how important it was. In the past, we've been there. Worf's been there. We've heard it mentioned. But even that now they solidify it as basically like going to Jerusalem or the Vatican. It's holy ground to them. But it's not just holy ground, it's a repository for these crystals. It's something that is not only sacred, but potentially dangerous.
Yeah, that's something that stood out to me that is in my notes to read for this section. My sensors went off immediately when it was said that this planet contains these time crystals and these Klingons were the guardians of these time crystals. And I'm thinking to myself immediately, doesn't this planet now need a general order like Talos 4 has? Because, I mean, this seems really dangerous to leave these things in the hands of some Klingon monks. And I would think they would need some kind of 24/7 security perimeter. I mean, any hostile alien that knows that those crystals are there, you're going to have to fight them off, because that's like the ultimate weapon. Anybody and everybody is going to want those crystals. So this planet seems really dangerous to me. Mareike, do you have any thoughts on that?
I found it interesting that L'Rell said that the Klingons themselves had stopped experimenting with the time crystals and were kind of, as you said, had appointed themselves the guardians of those crystals. And I assume that they have some sort of protection in place, because the Discovery only goes there after Tyler reaches out to L'Rell and arranges passage. So I assume the Klingons are guarding it. But yeah, I wonder, I guess the whole mission the ship is on right now will be under the highest security clearance possible to make sure a lot of that information never gets out once they've defeated Control. That's a whole other headache. But yeah, no one tell Harry Mudd about Boroff or anyone else who might want to use those crystals.
We need to hope against hope that Control doesn't have any access to Discovery's computers, or else it will know that the time crystals are there, and that would not be a good thing.
But we know that Boroff still exists in DS9 and other shows, so that's reassuring.
Sure. Yes, we can lean on future Trek shows for comfort on this one. Chris, any more thoughts on what you learned about Star Trek Universe?
Well, the thing is that going back to Boroff, it's probably from what I understand, Worf was there for the monastery part. He would not even people like that go to the monastery are probably not even aware of the time crystal repository.
True.
So it would have probably been in some secret area, locked or even cloaked away. They have the cloaking technology, so might as well use it planet side. So they probably do have a standing order stating no crystal will be used for these purposes and all that stuff in the Klingon Empire, and probably is a standing order or agreement or gentleman's agreement or unofficial interplanetary agreement with all the other powers in the galaxy, including the Federation, to not usurp these crystals for your own purposes. Like, this is dangerous. Even the Klingons stopped it, even though that we've seen in the future certain Klingons use time technology, and they probably found ways to get the supply for themselves secretly. But as a whole, even the Klingon state, this is dangerous. No one should have this type of power. We will guard it, but we won't use it or exploit it or even research it. This is over. So no one must know this forward, at least to the general public. If anyone wants to go, we'll maintain the monastery. But if anyone knows about this, we will deny it, we will hide it, and we will not mention it.
Yeah, well, we have to hope it remains a secret, and nobody's loose lips bring hostile alien forces to this planet. But so, Mareike, what did you learn about the Star Trek universe from this episode?
I was thinking one additional thing we learn is that there's an alien species called the Soyuzians, because Reno's wife, who is mentioned when she talks to Dr. Culver, is a Soyuzian. We don't learn anything more about them, but they're out there, and I'm interested to see if they'll bring them in at some point in the future. I know why they didn't tell us more about her in that scene, because it would have taken too much time. But my brain always instantly goes, oh, so who are these Soyuzians? Where are they from? What's their culture like? and things like that. So I hope that they'll bring some in season 3 in some way.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's one thing Discovery has done quite a bit of in the past is, give us a little inkling of something and then expound on it later.
Right.
So I have a lot of optimism that we will see Reno, aka take Nataro's character back once again, and we can possibly explore her backstory and her wife's backstory. So and Discovery is very, very good at that. So I have every confidence that that's going to happen. So anything else that you learned?
I also find it interesting that we learn that Pike knows about his fate, or that we watch him learn about what will happen to him. After in Perpetual Infinity, we have Dr. Burnham say, "I know what."
Yep.
I know your future, and you won't like it, or something like that. So that they now actually went there and show us Pike learning what will happen. I think I found that very interesting, and it raises interesting questions about fate.
Yes,
in
it does.
the Star Trek universe, and I have a bunch of other notes for the Spin It Again section on that. So that I find very interesting, but also it fits Pike as we have come to know him. I thought that he learns about this accident and what he will do, but that given the choice, he doesn't turn away and he doesn't say, "Oh no, actually, I don't want that to happen to me." So I thought that worked really well, but also, as I said, raises a lot of questions.
Oh my God, it does. That's on my list of things to talk about. And I had some copious notes and things that were rambling around in my head after that sequence happened. But I agree with you. That was very profound and spoke a lot about his character. And I like that they stuck with that, the character that they've established with Pike. And I was very curious all season as to what they were going to do with Pike and his, the future that we all know about, that he supposedly didn't know about, but now we know that he knows about it. I don't want to, flip your cards for Spin It Again, but this was one of the things that really stuck out to me in this episode, and I guess we can get into it under Spin It Again, but this was one of my play a new tracks was that I don't know if the word retcon necessarily fits this, because it didn't really change anything about Pike's eventual outcome. We didn't know much about his backstory prior to this, but it was interesting to me that they portrayed this in the way that they did, and it gave it a much more dramatic impact that he was able to see his future self. And have to reconcile that in his mind, and realize that who he is who he wants to be, and he chose to accept the time crystal regardless of what his future is going to be. And we can discuss all of the other things that brings out in the next segment, but that was something that was on my list for play a new track. You have anything else, Mareike, before we move on?
I think that's it from my side.
Okay, so I mean, one other thing that I don't have a lot of notes about, it was just a random thought, something that I learned from this episode that I'm really not quite sure what to do with at this point, is that Michael Burnham is the random element that Control can't project the outcomes around, which was interesting to me because I really don't understand why that is. Obviously, Dr. Burnham is no longer able to time travel, but I'm sure we're going to see the resolution to that in the next episode, where they send the time crystal forward and she's able to get the suit working again or whatnot. But I wasn't, it seemed like something that they were, they stated very emphatically during that discussion with Burnham and Spock, but it didn't seem to have much context around it. So I wasn't sure what your guys' thoughts would be on that. Do you have any thoughts about why Michael is so significant to Control, Chris?
Now this time, I think it's most likely because of the fact that Dr. Burnham is the link to it. And also Michael I think it's possibly her mere presence, or maybe she might be the eventual cause of certain things. I don't want to state anything else. It's just that I think she's more key than she realizes. We just don't know it yet. So I know this. Obviously it's a show, but with respect to this season's arc, and with respect to the remaining bursts and Dr. Burnham's unawareness of the origin of those, maybe Michael might eventually know what happens, or maybe she's the one that creates it. We don't know. So I'm stating that Michael might be a bit more important than we realize with respect to the final 2 episodes in this eventual story arc. We just haven't seen that yet. We know that Control considers her a threat, but why? We don't know. But even she doesn't know. But I think she is a bit more important in these last 2 episodes.
Interesting points. Mareike, any thoughts on that?
I've been thinking just now that Burnham might be the random element because she's survived several instances where she should have died. So she survives, as a kid, she survives the Klingon attack on her home. She survives that bombing on the Vulcan Learning Center because Sarek does something with his, what's it called, Katra?
Yep.
Then
Yes, Katra.
Then her mother saves her when she tries to run away by appearing to Spock for the first time. She survives a couple other things in season 1 and season 2. So I'm wondering if that is somehow connected, that she should have died at an earlier point, but she didn't. So now she's kind of some sort of wild card trickster.
Yeah, it could be a Final Destination thing.
Even though she's not a classical trickster in that sense. But I wonder if it's maybe something like that, but I don't know how they would reconcile that with other kind of Star Trekian ideas about fate and individual choice and things like that. So I'm probably wildly off with that one.
Well, who knows? Discovery goes in strange directions, so you could be dead on with some of that stuff.
Absolutely, it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Nothing is.
Some of these incidents have been to save Michael. So you might be exactly right. Someone or something is steering Michael towards the situation. So, for all we know, she's the random element. For all we know, she's the key to this.
Yeah.
She's not just some random element. She could be far more important, as I said before. She could be the key to solve all this.
She could be. And we did get a hint that there may be another time-traveling entity in this episode that was creating the signals. True. So maybe there's another big reveal coming that will shed some more light on Michael's importance to the overall Discovery arc. So I guess we'll have to wait in suspense for that to happen. But are you guys ready to move into our final segment, Spin It Again?
Sure.
I definitely am.
All right. So this is our final segment of DiscoTrek, and this is about the moments that stood out to us in this episode of Star Trek Discovery. So Mareike, why don't you kick us off? What moments stood out to you in this episode of Discovery?
So definitely, and I think that's the one that stood out most to everyone, the moment where Pike touches the crystal and then sees the accident and what that accident eventually does to him. And it stood out to me for several reasons. On the one hand, because I thought it was an interesting connection to the title, the Valley of the Shadows, and if you know that Bible quote, though I've walked through the Valley of the Shadows of Death, etc., etc. I thought that was an interesting way of working the titles in, and I think they do that really well across both seasons. But I think here they did it exceptionally well because it also applies to several other characters. But so I thought that was really nicely done, and I really loved once he comes out of that vision, when he sits there and he says, and he's told by Tenavik, you can still choose to walk away and not suffer this fate. And then he says to himself, you're a Starfleet captain, you believe in service, sacrifice, compassion, and love. And then he decides to not throw everything about himself away by running from this fate and to take the crystal. So I thought that was so well acted, as we've said before. And I also thought it was a really interesting contrast to season 1 and Captain Lorca, and Pike from his very first appearance has been deliberately, I think, constructed as the anti-Lorca and kind of the archetypical Starfleet captain, like the captain of all captains, if you will. So I found it very interesting that with Lorca, we had someone who was so convinced that he had some sort of special destiny and who was very ready to do everything and sacrifice everyone to get to that destiny. And with Pike, we get the counterpoint. We get someone who sees what will happen to him, but who says, I can't betray my own values and who I am as a person just to save my own skin. And, Lorca would totally not have taken that crystal. He would have hightailed it out of Boroff so quickly. So that was, I found that very interesting. And I really like all of these kind of parallels and echoes and mirror images that they've been working into season 2. So that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about also in terms of fate and what these two different approaches to fate and destiny tell us about the Star Trek universe, or about how the Discovery writers think about fate. And sometimes I'm not sure they themselves have quite decided whether they think fate is set in stone or not, or what the ultimate answer there is. But I like that they're at least playing with it. And I like, as I said before, I like that Pike got a choice. So because that also ties it back to when in one of the earlier episodes he says, we're always in a fight for the future. So I think all of that worked really, really well, in addition to kind of the emotional impact of that scene, of seeing him confront that and struggle with it and then choose the right thing, if you will, or what we would say the right thing is. And I think it's brave to know, oh, there's this accident. Like we knew up to this new episode, oh, there's this accident, and he's very brave and saves all of these cadets and suffers these injuries. But I think knowing that he knows that will come and choosing that fate for himself and then actually going onto that ship and doing all of that, I think ups the bravery even more. Like he's even braver than we thought he was, I think.
Yeah. No, I have to agree with that. I this is a topic that's come up a couple times during season 2 on DiscoTrek, and that the comparison between Lorca versus Pike and the polar opposite nature of the two captains, and feeling that it was almost a deliberate choice to give us this kind of breath of fresh captain air with Captain Pike, right? And I found it very refreshing. I really enjoyed it, and it's an interesting thing to think about. The difference between our season 1 captain and our season 2 captain, and extrapolating from that, what's our season 3 captain going to look like? It's a kind of a heavy thing to think about, but I think it illustrates the differences between people, and I think we can all kind of apply this philosophy and thought process to our own lives and people that we know, and the differences between them and their goals and what they would do to get to them and the sacrifices that they would choose to make. And I'd like to think that all of us are more like Captain Pike in what we would choose in that situation than we are like Lorca. Chris, do you have any thoughts on the Pike versus Lorca, or Pike's sacrifice and decisions and bravery in this episode?
Oh, I have plenty. The things that when I saw the initial vision, I was thinking, oh my God, is exactly what Mendez described in the menagerie. You see the plates rupture, you see everyone get out. He says, basically, get out. So it's basically what Mendez stated in the menagerie, in which he said he got all those cadets that were still alive out. And that's true. He wasn't dragging them or anything else, but he got them out at the sacrifice of his own life. You see the initial burns, but what really stood out to me was the subsequent vision in the hall. You hear the chair and it's sort of creeping, and you know what's going to happen.
That was well done.
Shoe is going to drop, and then when you see him actually in the chair and dare I say, their redesign of the chair, it actually looks better than the original in some ways, because it's a bit more self-contained, but also you see that his skin, it's falling off. It's worse than what we saw in the original series. It was far worse. It looks like he's in hell. It's not just some burns of which he just can't do. It looks bad. It really looks bad. And it sold the horror of the moment and the revelation that he actually knows this is going to happen to him within 7 to 8 years. So that's just, I mean, the sheer horror of it. To us, to have him actually see himself disfigured with a working brain, but with a body that's betraying him, inundated with delta radiation, a battery-driven heart, only able to move the chair in whatever direction in most cases. And that, even though that it's a really sad fate that he sees, he doesn't see past it. But even that, he sees enough. He doesn't know all the circumstances. All he knows is that he gets the cadets out, and it's an accident. It's an inspection tour. So he's wearing attire that looks like it's flag officer material, but it's not necessarily admiral material. You see the five insignia on his epaulets, which means it's not a regular admiral, but it's higher than a captain, obviously. So they've aligned it with original series continuity, which states that he is a fleet captain after this time. So he is wearing the uniform of a fleet captain. Notice the insignia, which is very similar to the Admiralty, but it is specific to him. So, but when you see the moment and you see him kneeling down and realizing, oh my God, this is what is going to befall me, and just recoil in horror, that is before he makes the decision. And he's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And then when Tanavik says, you can still walk away from this fate, but if you choose to take the crystal, your fate will be sealed. And we could talk about fate all day. We could talk about now that he knows, can you evade it? No, because the fact that he knows that once he does that, he's walking towards that path. He doesn't know when it's going to happen. We know, but he doesn't. All we know is that if he takes that crystal, if he says, give it to me, which he does, he's sealing his own fate, or at least at that point. He doesn't know about why. He doesn't know about what Spock's going to do later on. He doesn't know about him being taken on the Enterprise and Kirk trying the court martial and all that stuff. He doesn't know about any of it. But he clutches his Delta on his Discovery uniform and reaffirms every belief that he's had, and also weighs the potential risk of losing all sentient life in the universe. And it's not just about living up to Starfleet's ideals or principles. It's about the willingness to sacrifice yourself so that so many others will live. And when he says that, when he says, I won't turn away because of a fate that might befall me that I didn't envision before. And he says, give it to me. And at that point, he earned my profound respect as a character, because the fact that before this season, I had known him and I liked him and I respect him that much beforehand, because of the fact that if he could be named, if he's named after the Medal of Honor in the Next Gen DS9 era, and so many others I mentioned before, we've heard name drops all throughout the franchise history. This guy must be really good. With this episode, in that moment, when Tanavik says, I honor you, Captain, we honor him as well, because of the fact that we know fully well that he chooses this fate, and he fully knows that he's headed towards that chair.
I have this in my notes too, so let's just stay on this topic for a minute, because this was one of the things about this episode that I had a little bit of difficulty with, not necessarily all the things that you just referenced, Chris, but I felt it was a little bit nebulous as to why taking the time crystal solidifies your future. But I guess, Star Trek is Star Trek, and, we have to buy into it. But in my mind, yeah, that binds him to his future actions and the repercussions of those actions and the outcomes of those actions, but it didn't say anything about somebody else changing things. Like, I mean, it just seemed to me like he could be like, well, here's what the future's going to be. Discharge me so that I'm never on any training missions. It just didn't feel as resolute to me. Like, there seems to be other possibilities. Like, not everything was wrapped up. It seemed to be just about his own actions and his own fate. But it seems to me like someone, even if he was there, if he told all the cadets what was going to happen, they could just cancel the training mission and everything would be cool. I'm really not sure. It was very nebulous as to why exactly that would seal his fate. Very dramatic and impactful. Great character moments came out of it, but it just kind of felt like, okay, I guess I just have to accept this, even though there's so many holes in it and variables that aren't necessarily taken into account. Mareike, did you have any opinions on that?
I have to say that I was wondering how right Tenavik was about saying if you take the crystal, that will seal your fate, because that goes into that sort of predestination kind of direction that I'm not sure Star Trek necessarily wants to go into. But I guess they had to have something in there because we all know that will happen to Pike, and it looks like they're not going to change that, and I think that's good. But I think there's the possibility that maybe the Klingons think taking a crystal will seal your fate, but that it's not necessarily true. Or, as you said, someone else might still change things. We know that Dr. Burnham has changed the future with the people on Terra Elysium, so that's a possibility. I guess it might be some sort of self-fulfilling prophecy type, so now that he's seen that will happen, maybe he'll think it has to happen, so he won't even try to change it. I'm not quite sure, but I agree that they didn't really explain why taking the crystal leads to things happening in the way that he saw it. So in my mind, there's maybe possibilities for that not applying, but we also know that that is what will happen to him. So it's a bit of a catch-22, maybe, if you will.
It is, but you know what? It just occurred to me. This thought just popped into my head. You know, the Klingons are closely guarding these time crystals, but we found out in previous episodes that there are time crystals on the black market. Where are they coming from? Is there someone in the monastery who's leaking time crystals? Who knows? So, that leads me into another point, but I want to let you guys get your points out first before I launch into any of mine. So, Mareike, do you have any other things that stood out to you in this episode?
As I said, I really liked all of the scenes that Reno was involved in, partly because I just really like Tig Notaro and I really like what they've done with Reno. And I hope they keep her around for season 3. So I like the mess hall scene because as I think you, Jeff, said earlier, it shows us the characters a bit more. It gives us a bit more to chew on for the bridge crew. We get them. We see them playing that auto antonym game. We also see her and Reno and Stamets interact a little more. And then we see her talking to Culver, and I found that I really enjoyed the way they kind of bantered back and forth, and the glimpse at backstory for both of those characters that we got when they talked about wedding planning and when Reno talked about her wife. So I think that all worked really, really well, despite the reservations I mentioned earlier about them stretching out that particular subplot for too long. But I think it gave us a really good additional look at her character because she sees Stamets kind of struggling with the status of that relationship. And then she goes and puts on her wedding ring because I went back and looked at the mess hall scene, and she's not wearing it in that scene either because she's usually not wearing it or for work reasons, so for safety reasons, or just for privacy reasons, who knows? But then she does go to to sick bay, and she wears it. So in my mind, she obviously she deliberately goes there, because I'm pretty sure she usually wouldn't go to sickbay for a hangnail. So I loved how
it seemed deliberate, yeah.
Yeah, I loved the character work they did with that. And I've been waiting for her and Culver to interact ever since they announced her. I had a whole theory about the Hiawatha maybe being Culver's earlier posting after the first episode aired. It looks like that won't come to fruition, but I really enjoyed that, and I thought both of those scenes were good, kind of mostly funny.
But character building,
right,
yeah.
Character building, but also kind of lighter moments in a season that has been really relentless.
Yeah.
Where emotions are concerned. So I thought that worked really well for me.
Yeah, I agree that I do like the fact that they inject some lighter moments into these otherwise heavy episodes, whether it's emotional heaviness or drama heaviness in other ways. Yeah, it's nice to have those little short breaks. And I thought those the moments between Reno and Culver were some nice character building moments, as well as giving a little bit of comic relief and some lighter elements to the story. So, Chris, what moments stood out to you in this episode?
Actually, I like the Reno moments too. The thing is that also when Marina goes in, we see a very veiled secondary reference back to the menagerie, because she goes in for a hangnail. And remember, McCoy said, "Oh, when he gets called back to the Enterprise in the menagerie part 1, it's like probably someone discovered a hangnail." So if anyone picked that up, it's like, yeah, they were really channeling that episode when they wrote this episode. So for obvious reasons, but not for that one. It's like someone just threw that in just for fun. And you know what? It was fun. It was a nice way to go back to the Culver one, but also just states like, you got to talk to him, that type of thing. But even that, I like the moment in the mess hall, because it's not just the distance between Culver and Stamets. I like just the banter between the crew, because we don't see the crew outside of the bridge that often. We don't see them in a social setting, at least not as much this season as was last time. I mean, we had the party last season. We've seen some footage from Arium earlier in the season, and now we see the mess hall scene, which they're basically just having lunch and talking and chewing the breeze. And I like more of those episodes. It's like any other mess hall scene from like Voyager or 10 Forward scene from Next Gen, or it's just general being, general being in the moment, where like just enjoying the company of your crewmates. And those moments, I think, have been somewhat lost as of late. But they're getting back to it, but we want more. It's not that we don't like Michael or Saru or Stamets or Pike or anyone else. We just want to know more of the other characters, because we want to know more about Detmer and everyone else. And we knew about Ariam obviously before what happened to her, but we just want to know more about these characters. And if it's just moments like that, which we show them in the mess hall or at a party, or even just talking down, like running down a hallway, not like the marathon scene earlier this year with Tilly, I'm all for it. We need more character moments. Just life on the ship. I just want to see a little bit more of that. Not a great deal, but interjected a little bit more here and there.
No, I agree. It humanizes the characters. It makes them more relatable. That's always a good thing in my mind. Mareike, what were you saying?
And I will also say, I found it interesting that it's, again, to me, kind of a parallel to season 1, where we have Stamets sitting in the mess hall alone drinking tea, and then Tilly kind of butting in and asking him about his side effects. And here we kind of get, again, an echo of that scene with Reno kind of getting all up in his business and trying to figure out why he looks so sad. But at the same time, he's sitting at a table with all of these other people. So it's an interesting visually at least an interesting nod to how much more integrated he has become with the rest of the crew. So I thought that also worked really well.
Yeah, I
again, as a
agree.
character development bit.
I agree. I agree with both of you. I am looking forward to seeing more of these, short character building, humanizing sequences with these crew members who've been, I hate to use the word neglected, but I feel like we haven't gotten enough of them. So, this kind of stuff to me is the essence of Star Trek. And what I love about Star Trek is the exploration, of these characters. And all of the previous shows have done that to a greater extent so far than Discovery has. And hopefully we're going to get more of that stuff. We're going to get to more of that stuff. It seems like they've been trying to do that a lot more in season 2 than they did in season 1. So I'm looking at that as a net positive. Chris, any other moments that stood out to you?
Just a bit more of the Spock Burnham dynamic. They're not above snarking each other, as was the case, and also it's good that Spock and Burnham are how to say it, tolerant enough, and I wouldn't say close enough, but at least dependent enough, so that way they'll have each other's back at least for the time being. So that's good. But if I were to go back to the cruise scenes, like if they are neglected, give them a short trek. Give them 15 minutes, just them. It's like everyone else is off. Just give them 15 minutes, even if it's just talking or a small problem or changing a conduit or something. Just give them 15 minutes and just have them talk.
Yeah,
that's what I would do. I would watch for that.
Yeah, what are our short treks going to be for season 2? That's a great point.
Yeah. I'm just saying that if you want, suggested to the people, but such as to the higher ups, but if anyone on the show, if it's writing staff or cast or whatever is listening to this, we're telling you this right now. Give the rest of the bridge crew a short trek, or at least a bit more in the season, just to know them, not just area like the episode area. Just give us like an extra short trek in which we're just seeing them in the moment during the day or at lunch or something, and something comes up and they need to solve it. So I'd love a short trek like that.
As would I.
Yes, definitely.
As would I. All right, well, a couple quick things from me before we wrap the show up. This first one, forgive me, you guys, this is very self-serving. Finally, this is something that I kind of went on a little bit of a rant about on the last episode of DiscoTrek. Finally, someone acknowledges that blowing up the ship is the right thing to do. I thought that in the last episode, I'm like, that is the most obvious solution to this problem, since we can't delete the data, and Section 31 and Control is going to be relentless until it gets the data. The only real logical thing to do right now is, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to blow up the ship since we can't do anything else with this data. So I was oddly felt vindicated when Michael brought that up in this episode, because we've seen other Starfleet vessels self-destructed in the past, so it didn't seem like a stretch to me that could be something that was a suggestion to this problem, being that it seemed like a really obvious solution to it. But now the next thing that I had written down here, and this is something that I don't think a lot of people out there are going to agree with, but this was something that came up to me while I was watching this episode. And, I guess if anybody out there listens to some of the other tricorder shows that I am a part of, that I'm a big proponent of rewriting Star Trek. So I would have really have preferred that the time crystals were under the care of some new benevolent alien race, aside from the Klingons. It seems really sketchy to me that, not even a single house of the Klingon Empire would have seized the opportunity to take those crystals and change the outcome of the Klingon War. I mean, this is just, knowing the Klingons, knowing their, warlike tendencies, it just seems really strange to me that, these things would be under the care of the Klingons. And, it's, like I said before, it's like the ultimate weapon. And it just seems to me that someone in the Klingon Empire would have said, hey, listen, we've got this stuff in our domain. Why are we not using it to change the outcome of this war that we're obviously not happy with? Obviously we saw earlier in the season, the Klingons aren't really happy with the way things went down in that war. So I would have rather have seen something like the Guardian of Forever, or some other benevolent or altruistic race that was guarding these things. I don't know. Maybe I'm alone in that. What do you guys think, Mareike? What are your thoughts on that?
To be honest, I hadn't really thought about it like that yet. But I think you have a point. It is interesting that none of the other houses have tried to get at those crystals, and I wonder, and that, I guess that ties back to the earlier discussion about how well known their existence is, because if only the Chancellor and we don't even know if all of the monks in the monastery know that the crystals are there. So that might only be a couple, and then the Chancellor, I guess, has to know, but L'Rell doesn't have any say on Boroff or in that monastery. So I think you can kind of sort of explain why that has not happened. But yeah, that's a very good point to raise. And it would have been interesting to see a different alien species. Then again, it would have maybe crowded the episode a little to have to introduce a whole new species. And I really, really liked that L'Rell and Tyler had a moment to talk and to kind of resolve some of their lingering issues, and that they got to hear a little bit about their son. So I think that sold me on the time crystals being on Boroff, and Kenneth Mitchell usually does such a good job with all of these different Klingons, and I had to laugh a little because I joked to friends of mine after Perpetual Infinity that maybe Kenneth Mitchell will come back and play the son of Folk and L'Rell. So maybe I need to make more stupid jokes about Discovery, and then I'm true. But that's a good point. And I wonder if we will see repercussions down the line if they bring the Klingons back in season 3. If that will become a problem for L'Rell.
Yeah, it's definitely wide open, and we're getting a little bit tight on time, so I'll rush through my final thing here, and this is something that hasn't come up in the episode yet, but was a hot topic on the previous DiscoTrek. Man, the Borg vibe in this episode was so heavy. We've got some, Gant's voice changing into a more robotic Borg-like tone. That really stood out. Trying to inject nanoprobes into Burnham's eye with a needle. The fact that nanoprobes can live outside of a body is a little bit new, but I thought that was interesting. The fact that he's not quite impervious to phaser fire, but almost is. It seems like it's an evolving thing. I mean, it really, really feels like we're working towards a Borg origin story here. Chris, what are your thoughts on this kind of Borg-like behavior?
I think, obviously, it's quite alarming. The thing is that we know Control is incredibly adaptive, highly intelligent, and this is just another level to it. So when we see the nanobots or nanoprobes, whatever, escape the body and actually manifest and go after Michael in the literal sense, it's scary. As an aside, Michael dual wielding phasers, which is rare in Star Trek.
Yeah, it is.
Me being a John Woo fan, having seen some of his work, that's a nice little callback to it, and also just the other gunfights that I like with that respect. So it's good to see that skill is not lost. But going back to the probes, it just shows the tenacity of Control. Control wants this data.
It does.
And they will usurp anything or anyone in order to get it. Even if it means, neutralizing certain threats or taking over certain bodies. We've seen that. We've seen that multiple times. It'll happen again. And it just shows that Control and 31, or controlling 31, dare I say, will go after it. by any means necessary. And
Mhm.
it's now not just 31, it's just control. And that's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. It is. Mareike, any thoughts on the Borg possible origins?
I am still hoping that they're not going for a Borg origin story, because I don't
Me
know if
too.
anyone really needs that. And
No.
there's not every kind of cyborg / AI story has to be tied to the Borg.
Mm-hmm.
As terrific an adversary as they have been. So I'm hoping that all of that, all of those kind of things we've seen in the past few episodes are a colossal red herring, and they'll do something else with control.
God,
And all
I hope so.
things. So
I hope so too. I lamented over this in the last episode, and I would also like to keep the Borg's backstory a mystery. I think it's better that way. But all right, so before we close up the show, let's go around the table and let everyone out there in listener land know where they can locate us if they want to talk more Trek with us. Chris, where can people find you online?
If they wanted to find me, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, both at CBUNYE, just my first initial and then my last name, CBUNYE at Twitter and on Instagram.
Awesome. Mareike, where can people find you online?
I am on Twitter, and my handle on Twitter is SPYCHALA and then capital M. So my last name and an M.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way to find me.
All right. And I am Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter if you want to reach out to me. The show is disco_Trek. So feel free to reach out to all of us if you want to talk more Trek or expound on any of the things we've talked about on this episode. We would love to hear from you and engage with you. So that wraps up episode number 40. Amazing. 40 episodes already of DiscoTrek. And we will be back again next week to discuss the next episode of Star Trek Discovery. Thank you, as always, for listening to the show, and another shout out to our wonderful Patreon supporters. We love you all. Thank you so much for supporting the show and the network. We couldn't do what we do without you. So until next week, live long and prosper.